Well, thank you all so much for joining us today from around the world and in our own backyard in Rochester. We are very excited for the final of this year's historic process demonstrations, which have been kind of a fun new series that we've introduced as a way for people to get to know more about what happens in our historic process workshops. Today, Mark Osterman is going to be telling us about 19th century retouching techniques, which we're very excited about. We've had some hints to what's going to happen today in previous ones. If you missed any of our previous historic process demonstrations and want to catch up, you can see all of them on YouTube. These talks wouldn't have been possible without generous support from Art Bridges and from the National Endowment for the Humanities. It was these two grants that gave us the capability to pull these things off. And we're really thankful for everything that they've done so that we can share these with you. But this program wouldn't be possible without also the support of our members and donors. We're actually right now in our year-end appeal, and anything that you can donate to help the museum allows us to do these types of programs. We really do rely on the support of members and donors to do this type of engagement and everything that we do. So we hope that you will support us. So a quick couple housekeeping things for using Zoom during this demonstration. If you have any questions, and we love questions, please ask lots of questions. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your computer screen. We will be addressing those at the end of the demonstration. If you're having technical issues, if you just want to say hi, if you want to share anything, feel free to use our chat function. That's more for kind of conversation. Oh, and I forgot to remove this. We don't have closed captions this time. The beta that we tried during the last demonstration did not go as planned. However, we will have closed captions on the YouTube video that we'll be releasing. So within the next week, we will have one with closed captions if you want to see that. We are working on next year getting closed captions for everything to make it more accessible. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce Mark Osterman, who's going to be telling us more about 19th century retouching techniques.
Hello, and welcome to the last session of some interesting and esoteric information based on 19th century photography. Today we're talking about retouching, and specifically retouching the negative. And it's a little different today because Rochester is now in the orange zone. There's no one in this room. Kate is at her home. Hi, Kate. And Nick is somewhere out in the museum. And so I don't have the people to help me pass things to me here at the desks. I will be having my movable tables, as we've been doing in the last three lectures. So let me get into retouching. In the other lectures, there was a lot of talk about who had led to what certain type of process. Retouching does not have an ancient background. And so the history of it is actually pretty easy. But I was able to find the earliest known retouched photograph. Kate, would you please put the first image up on the screen, and I'll talk about that. And I'm checking with my iPhone because that's how I keep track of which images are which. For those of you who don't know, the name of this piece is called the point of view. Some people call it the view from the window at Grappling. It's an image that was made by Nicéphore Niepce. It's the oldest known photograph in the world. We don't have it. It's at the University of Texas in Austin at the Harry Ransom Center. But this image, if you have studied any photography, you have seen this image, you know what it is, it's familiar to you. But what you don't realize is that everything that is on that image, 98% of what's on that image was retouched. Now, it's a little misleading. It was not retouched by Niepce. It was retouched by Helmut Gernsheim, the man who discovered the original plate. Let's go to the next picture, please. This is what the plate actually looks like. If you go to Texas, if you go to Austin and go to the Harry Ransom Center, it is on display every single day. It's a pretty archival photograph. It's an image made with asphaltum on a polished pewter plate or an alloy plate. And the reason why it was retouched by Helmut Gernsheim is, well, people couldn't figure out what they were looking at when they looked at this. And so when they originally took pictures of the plate, it probably didn't look much different than this. But Helmut Gernsheim decided, let me enhance some things so that people can get a better sense of what they're looking at. And so the image you've been looking at for all these years was actually a silver gelatin print from a copy negative of this plate. And so I just had to get that out of the way before I go any further. Okay, you can come back to my screen now. I'm here. And so really, retouching doesn't really happen until people start making photographs with the intent of making photographs. And so that leads us to somebody like William Henry Fox Talbot. Now, Fox Talbot is the person who invented really the first practical way of making a negative image. And of course, now we have to say, what is a negative? I was talking to a child upstairs. They were looking at the cloud exhibit last week, and I mentioned something about a negative. They had no clue what a negative was. So I guess I have to say what a negative is. So actually, I'll go back and I'll show you some images as well. Kate, could you bring us back to the slide? This is a picture of hands holding a photogenic drawing negative. Photogenic drawing was the first process that Talbot had invented in the way we were doing it. We were doing this at Laycock Abbey. We taught a workshop there. This is the image that was being pulled right from the camera. There's no developer. The image is printed out onto silver chloride paper and given enough exposure time, and in this case, it was 2 hours. When the piece of paper is pulled, then what you pull from the camera, what you get is a negative image. Everything's backwards. What you're looking at are the cloisters at Laycock Abbey, and the cloisters are made out of whitish color stone. And so in the negative, they appear dark. Next slide. Now, in order to make a positive image, you have to shine light through the negative onto a second piece of paper or something that is sensitive to light, which will also print out. Now, in the case of this drawing, I have them separated. You really wouldn't have them separated. They have to be in contact. But I had to draw it this way so you understand that the thing on top is the negative, and the thing below is a positive print. Now, when you're making a negative, you may not get all the information you need. And that's where retouching comes in. Next slide. This will give you a better sense. This is an actual photogenic drawing negative made at Laycock Abbey. And next slide. Here is the positive image from that same negative. The different colors have to do with different fixing agents that Talbot used. In this particular case, I made these. Talbot did not make these images. But in order to augment certain areas, maybe something's too dark on the final print. Well, what you can do is you can actually add density to the negative so that when you make the print, the positive comes out lighter. Next slide. By the time this image was made, there were more than Talbot making photographs. And in fact, Talbot had invented a new process called the calotype. The calotype process didn't take as much exposure time. It was a latent image process. You didn't see the image right away until you developed the piece of paper that was in the camera. But I want you to notice in this particular negative, and I don't have a clue who made this negative. It's in the collection here at the George Eastman Museum. This calotype negative shows some modeliness in the sky. Those are not clouds. That's just the way the chemistry happened to fall in place, maybe because of handwork. There is the same kind of modeliness where the buildings are, but you don't notice them. And the reason you don't notice them is because the sky is one value. So it's very easy to see problems. Next slide. Here's another calotype negative. In this one, someone fixed the problem. There may have been swirls because of poor brushing or poor developing technique, but instead of featuring those, which is something we actually like today, instead of featuring those back then, what they did was to add India ink to the sky and just block out the sky completely so that when you make the positive print, it prints out as a white sky. Next slide. Here's another great example. This one is by John Charles Smith, 1850s, 1840s. And this particular image, I believe it's Istanbul, and we'll find out in a second. The sky has been painted out with India ink. Next slide. But the back, you can see where he actually waxed or oiled the print. And the reason for waxing or oiling is to make the print faster, and also to subdue the effect of the papers that were made back then, what they call wove paper. We still have it today. The wove pattern gets filled up with the wax. It's less noticeable when you make your final print. Next slide. Here's another great example. Here is a calotype negative, and let's see if I have it on my phone here because I need to know which one's next. Yes, this is the negative before retouching. Next slide. And here is a duplicate negative, a second negative that has the sky retouched out. And in this case, it may not have been because of swirls or chemical patterns in the sky, and maybe because they wanted to isolate the subject to make it more important. So again, painting out the sky is something that was actually pretty routine when doing calotype or paper negatives. Next slide. Here is a calotype negative I made back in, I don't know, in the 1990s. And you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner where the brushing didn't have enough silver, there's a part of the sky that is lighter. Now, if we made a positive print from this, that would photograph as dark. And so that's a great candidate for adding some density in the sky. The only problem is this picture was taken in March or April, and there are no leaves on the trees. And the problem with that is that it's really hard to retouch the entire sky because of all the very thin sticks. If there were branches with leaves, it would be so much easier. I'm going to show you how it was done. So camera 2, please. And I'm going to move over to the other side. Let's see. All right. Are we on camera 2? I'm not sure I see.
Yep, we are.
What's that?
We are. Yep.
We are? Okay, I don't see it on the monitor. All right, so this is a calotype negative. There's a thing right in the middle here. There we go. This is a calotype negative. It's on paper. And you can see it. Hold it up so you can see a little better. You can see it's missing a corner. There are differences in density on this negative. And there are things we can do about that. In fact, I'm going to put it on a light table right here. We'll see if this works. All right, so now you can see light going through. And if you look up on the top, it may not be so easy to see on this. It has more density in the sky here than it is on the edges. Now, one thing we can do is we can take India ink and a brush, and we can add density. So I would start out normally down here where the windows are and just brush in more density. Now, there's no way in hell I can do a good job of this for what we're doing today. It would take more time, and I'd be turning this piece of paper many, many times while I'm adding this brushwork. But you get the general idea. What I'm doing is I'm adding India ink to the windows right here. And of course, I can also add it along the tree line. So as I go like this, oh, there's a branch. You can edit, right? If you don't like something, you can actually remove things you don't want. But you can see right there, I'm given what I'm doing right now with a brush, you can see that I'm adding density and retaining some of the sticks. Now, if I wanted to retain all those sticks, what I'd have to do is use a pen, an ink pen. So what I would do is then just dip this in and go around some of these, and then fill in the rest. So I'll go like this, in between, and fill in the rest. And come back with a brush. So that's with a brush, or pardon me, with a pen. But there are other things I can do as well. I'm going to go back and put this back onto the white paper so you can see a little better. You can see now the gain in density that I put there. If I wanted to just have a little bit of density and more of an even tone, what I can do is use powdered graphite. I can take my finger and put my finger in the graphite, and you can see that I can rub it in the top and then lightly rub as I go down toward the horizon line. And again, a combination of this, I'm going to rub it a little harder up in here, and the India ink, you can be very creative. You can choose how you want the lighting to be. You can also use it in the building. For instance, under here is actually a part of the building that is in the shade. If I lightly apply some of that, wipe off my finger here, all I have now is just a very thin gain of density that's very, very smooth and even. If I want, I can also use a pencil. So let's say I want to add more density right here. You see, I can add density with the pencil. There's some rafters. I'm going to add some rafters with my happy little pencil. There we go. Well, there's some rafters that were not there before. And again, adding density anywhere you want. If you had a part of the tree where you wanted the highlights to be a little stronger, you might just do very thin, jagged marks along the edge of the tree. And along that edge, you feather it toward the center, and now you gain some density on that area. Now, learning how to use a pencil, of course, you have to learn to control the pencil. So like if you wanted something that is, let's say we have a cylinder here. You know, you have a cylinder, you start out dark, then you go lighter, and darker again. Like that. This table has some marks on it that are coming through. I'm doing a rubbing of the table. But you sense that that now doesn't look so flat anymore. It actually has the feeling of 3 dimensions. Like so. Now, the other thing we can do with this calotype negative is make it translucent. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go over this way to the table. Guys, can you give me camera 1, please? You'll never know how difficult this is until you do it yourself. I don't mean the retouching, I mean demonstrating these things. Here's a hot plate. Normally, I would actually have a sheet of metal on top of this, but for what we're doing right now, this would be good enough. And here's some beeswax. And so what I'm going to do is just rub the beeswax where I want this to print a little faster. I have to make sure it goes all the way through, and I can target certain areas. So right now I'm targeting where that, I'm gonna do this part too. I'm targeting where that water wheel is, and I'll do the roof. Because actually it's maybe a little bit too much density there. You could also use oil. You don't have to use wax, but in this case it's beeswax. We're gonna go back over and check here so I can show you what the waxing did. Are we there? So you can see now the waxing made it more translucent than it was. So I can add density, I can take away density, depending on what I need for the image. So that's pretty much the way paper negatives work. Now, if you wanted to use something that was a different color rather than black for density, that's okay too, because you can add powdered pigment that's made from iron rust or iron oxide. So there's a red color. And again, these are dry pigments, so you can add them. You can make what they call a stump, which is just a rolled up piece of paper to add more directly. Or there were also transparent pigments. So let me make some transparent pigment. And actually, we're going to go back over. Sorry, guys. We're going to go back over to the other table. I'll move this hot plate out of here. Just have a Julia Child feel. All right. So now I'm going to show you one of the earliest known dyes for doing photographic retouching. There are many ways to get red. Like I say, this is iron oxide. It's a powder. Rouge is the other name for it. It's you put it on your cheeks. You can polish the daguerreotypes with it. Rouge, the other red meat. The other thing is something called cochineal. Cochineal are little bugs. The camera. They're from South America, and they're taken off of plants, cactus usually. And if you take them and grind them up, I'll take it here, put it inside my mortar pestle here, grind them up, you get a very, very nice red, crimson red dye. Now, of course, normally I would filter this, but for what we're doing, this would be good enough. So I ground it up. I'll put a little bit of, put that inside the container here. And I'll add some water. Shake this up. And there we have a red pigment, or pardon me, a dye. This was a popular dye for all sorts of things until they came up with synthetic dyes. In fact, it's used in lipstick today. It's used for it's used in food, made from bugs, ground up bugs. This then would be used to brush onto the paper. So instead of black powder, which was graphite, or instead of iron oxide powder, you could use something like this. Let me put this aside. Now, of course, after the calotype negative, we get in the paper negative, or pardon me, a glass negative. The glass negatives, well, the first ones were albumin on glass, and they were retouched the same way as the next batch, which would be collodion. So let me show you a collodion negative and what we need for the collodion negative. Well, let's see. This is a collodion negative, and you notice that it's a little hard to see. You're not looking through it, you're looking at it. It turns out that the collodion negative has a silver particle size that's so small that it reads as a light hue, as opposed to the later negatives. Here is a later negative. This is a gelatin dry plate negative. Gelatin dry plate negatives, by definition, lean towards black. Collodion negatives lean towards a tan color. However, because of certain after processing, there are lots of ways to change the collodion negative to different colors. But be as it may, it is a lighter color usually. The collodion negative was always varnished. I know it's hard to say always and never, but okay. They should have been varnished. If they weren't varnished, somebody wasn't doing their job. The reason for that is a collodion negative is very, very fragile if not varnished. This is an unvarnished negative. Let's go back over to the light table. Kate, follow me. Try to keep up. I don't know if we can even see this on here. It's a little hard to see. Yeah. I don't know if I can I focus? No, it won't let me change it. Well, you're going to have to trust me on this one. The collodion negative, let's see, how can I show this? If I take my finger and go like this, I can scrape right through it. There we go. Just like that. In fact, if you have a collodion negative and you slide it into a paper envelope, it's possible that it can, come back here again. Okay. It's possible that you can scratch the negative even by sliding a collodion negative into a sleeve. And so most collodion negatives have a covering of varnish. The varnish, they had varnishes made with a gum called Sanderac, varnishes that were made with amber, real amber, varnishes that were made with shellac, but all of them did the same thing, protect the negative. Now, retouching glass negatives, there's a new way of addressing glass negatives, and that is applying pencil on the surface where the image is. And so I'm going to show you this. I'm going to bring it right up to the camera. Here is a 19th century negative. Did it focus on it? I'm waiting for it to focus. Anyway, there's a 19th century negative that has retouching on the surface. And sorry, I have to check on my iPhone where I am with my slides. Kate, could you bring up the next slide, please? And you've seen this before in my other talks. These are the visible spectrum. Wet collodion, daguerreotype, all of the old processes were only sensitive to violet and blue. Now the problem is that our faces have all the colors that the process isn't that sensitive to, red being one of them. Next slide. And I've shown this before as well. This is a still life I did. The sky metaphor is the tablecloth with the blue and white pattern. But also look at the red and blue objects. If we look at this as photographed in collodion, next slide, you'll notice that the tablecloth is perfectly white because blue and white photograph is the same value. And you'll notice that the tomato, the orange, the lemon, and the apple are all very black. And that's because they're red and orange and yellow. And they're the colors that are in our skin. I don't care who you are. Well, maybe if you're Irish. My wife, she's Irish and only her freckles photograph. And it turns out that, yes, that's the problem. If you have freckles, they come out as black on the final print. Next slide. And so there had to be a way to make you look better, because if you photograph somebody with wet plate collodion or albumin glass or even daguerreotype, anything that was red on your face, which means a pimple, a blemish, a wrinkle, an age spot, all of those things photographed as clear on the negative, meaning on the print they would be black. Now, the daguerreotype was not retouched. Their way of getting around it was to try to make the face as white as possible. So it had to do with exposure versus development. And the same with tintypes and ambrotypes, frankly. Most tintypes and ambrotypes don't have good skin tones. The features are there, but the skin doesn't have any what we would call roundness. Next slide. And so the way they got around it with glass negatives is very much like they did with calotype negatives, and that is to add density. If you look at this negative on the screen, you're seeing a negative that was taken in a studio. It's not a stereo negative. One was taken, and then the plate was slid in the camera, and the second was taken. And this gave the photographer some choices. Clearly, he didn't like the one on the right because the plate was not varnished on that side. And this shows you how effective the varnish was. This is a plate from the 1870s. The left side is varnished, the right side is not. Notice how the tide line of that varnish shows you where the varnish was. And anything beyond the varnish has now darkened because it's oxidized. The silver is turned dark. And it was easy to scratch. But now we have to figure out how to retouch the part that's varnished. It turns out that the varnish doesn't take pencil very well. Next slide. And so here, I don't know if it's his wife. So the man may be the photographer, the woman may be doing the retouching, but she's working on a retouching stand, and she is adding density to the thin spots on the negatives, and they would be the places where you would have freckles or wrinkles or something you definitely don't like. Next slide. This is what it looks like on a retouching stand. The retouching stand is essentially the 19th century equivalent of a light table. You use it right by the window. There's a mirror. And you can see in this particular picture, there are two images on a plate. Next slide. These are the two images. They're negatives. I know they appear like a positive. That's the characteristic of collodion negatives. This is what they look like when you're looking at them with light on the top rather than light behind. The one on the left has been retouched. The one on the right has not. It's a great example to show you what they thought they needed to subdue some of the things that they thought the customer would not like. And that's really what it was all about. It's helping people look their best. And sometimes they went a little too far. But this is the least amount that you'd actually see. And let's take a look at it on the light, on the table. Next slide, please. On the retouching table. So that's what that same negative looks like when lighted from behind on the retouching table or retouching desk. Next slide. And here are two images. They're positives, right? These are prints, not negatives. And they show what the retouching did. On the left side, that is from a negative that was not retouched. And on the right side is the image where it was retouched. Now, today, of course, we would make the freckles darker. It was a different aesthetic back then. They were looking for perfection. Next slide. And so the skill of the retoucher was very important in a studio. Very few images were ever left out of the studio that were not retouched. Next slide. And the retouching desk got bigger and more elaborate. Here's a floor model. Next slide. And the very same in my studio at home. Next slide. It has a hood that comes down, and it's for larger negatives. Next slide. Now, on very tiny negatives, it was impractical to try to lighten up certain areas of the face. And so this tiny negative, designed originally for carte de visite images, had just a dollop of thin red fluid. And it didn't block out the face completely. It just generally lightened it up because it holds back the light that's being used when you're making the print. So you're putting the negative in the paper in the sun, and this very thin wash of red makes it possible to make the faces look a little lighter. Next slide. Other negatives needed a lot more work. Here's a case where a collodion negative had some bad chemical reactions, and the face is pretty good. And so what they would normally do with something like this, next slide, is paint out the background. Now on the left, you can see where, again, they've added just a little bit of light red translucent pigment or dye so that the face prints lighter. That's actually a negative from Japan. And so Japanese skin would necessarily photograph darker. The one on the right is from England. And in that particular case, they just painted out the background to get rid of all the unsightly lines and chemical striations on the negative. Next slide. And so this famous picture, one of the conspirators of the Lincoln assassination, probably one of the sexiest pictures of the 19th century, he had his portrait taken alongside the turret of an ironclad ship where he was being held captive. I like it like this, but if you look at the next picture, there's a co-conspirator taken in the same location, and they just removed the background. And so you think Photoshop is new. It isn't. This is the 1860s. Next. But truly, the reason for retouching is to make people look better. We could talk about coloring, but that's really another lecture altogether because that's a long, long road to go down. And I think the retouching is more important in this case. Next slide. And there were many ways of retouching the face. The main thing is to create a surface on the glass that will take pencil. And so most of the retouching for faces was done with graphite. This particular one is an invention that someone devised where the woman would push on the treadle. And if you look at her arm, where the arm that's holding the pencil, the hand that's holding the pencil with the arm, you'll notice that there's a rod. And by pushing the treadle, it makes her hand vibrate. This allows you to put little dots of graphite rather than strokes. Next slide. Here's a picture of my great-grandfather, Howard Burt Kelly. And I always wondered about his skin. There was something about it that I didn't quite understand. And so if you look closer at the image, next slide, you'll notice the little dots. I thought I had a skin condition. And the idea later on, and this one was clearly 1880s, 1890s, the idea was not to just fill in the wrinkles, maybe leave a few, but to feather in the effect with a series of little dots. Next slide. When gelatin negatives were invented, you could remove some of the information. So you can't scratch a collodion negative without going all the way through. Maybe I should do something on the board. You know, they have the light again on camera 1. And I'll bring in the black light. Now, in one of the videos, I think it may have been the first one, I did a whole series of how to retouch the sky on a landscape negative. So if you'd like to see that, refer back to that video. But let's just talk for a second about the difference between the different negatives. Let's just say this is a layer of glass, right? That's glass. There's another piece. So these are two cross sections of glass. Now, in the collodion process, let's say that this is the collodion layer. In the gelatin process, here's the gelatin layer. So right off the bat, you can see that the collodion plate has a very thin layer that holds the silver. And in the gelatin process, the gelatin is very thick. Now, the collodion must have varnish. So here's a layer of varnish. Remember why we need the varnish, because it's very fragile there. And the gelatin doesn't need varnish, although the very earliest gelatin plates were coated with varnish. And sometimes they have a layer of varnish, not always, but sometimes they do. Now, let's find some silver. Okay, I'm going to use blue for silver. I don't know if it'll show up. You know what? I'm going to enlarge this. We're going to take this section and, see that? There's the collodion layer. And it turns out that the silver is only on the surface and just under the surface. Here is the silver in a gelatin image. I'll remove the varnish because, again, not always will varnish. There's the gelatin, and here is the silver in a gelatin image. Hope you can see that. First of all, the silver is really thick and big. That's the reason why black and white negatives are black, because the bigger the silver, the darker the color. And then in the collodion image, here is the this is all collodion. The silver in the collodion is very tiny and right near the surface. Now, if I were to take something and scratch the surface of the collodion, look, it goes through the image silver very quickly. That's why you need the thick varnish on the top. But if I try to scratch the same depth on the gelatin, I lost a little bit of the silver, but not all of it. So it turns out you don't need to varnish the gelatin dry plates. It's good if you do, actually, but you don't need to. You have to on collodion because the collodion is so fragile. But that darn varnish makes it hard for you to get pencil on the image. Well, there's a way around it. We're going to show how to do that. Rid of things I don't need. This is where Nick comes in here. Oh, Nick. Well, the first thing we're going to do, we have to roughen the varnish. And so, let me see. And I have here a collodion negative. There's no way to run a rheostat. Maybe you can see. Right, there's a collodion negative. And what we're going to do is we're going to roughen up the surface where her face is. But we need something to do that. And so what we're going to use is a traditional material. This is called cuttlebone fish or cuttlefish bone. It's the stuff you see at the pet shop that's held in the bird cage for the parrots to sharpen their beaks. So I'm going to put that into this water pestle here. Now, normally what I would do is after grinding this up, no mess. After grinding this all up, I would put it into a bag of a kind of an open weave cloth. I put it in a bag and then I'd shake the bag and it would filter through. That's how I filter it. And so there we have cuttlefish bone. And I have some here that I've sifted, just like the cooking show. And see which side is the collodion side, which side is right. So this is the side that has the image. We're going to go over to the other table so you can see this a little easier. keeps asking me a question. All right, so there is the negative, and now, well, if only you could hear this. I'm going to take some of the cuttlefish foam powder and put it right on her face. And then I'm going to take my finger and rub. Scratch, 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 scratch. If I feel a piece that's bigger than the others, I stop and move it aside. That would actually go right through the varnish. There we go. And so that is now preparation for retouching right on the negative. And so I can find something here. I will show you that. Just add a little bit of longer nose, ear, bit around the side. And again, I'm doing this upside down and backwards. You can see that little bit of retouching because I roughen the surface. Now, here's the thing. If I do retouching on the collodion side, it's very, very sharp in the final image. If I want it to be something that is a little bit more subdued, I have two choices. Let's go back to the other table. I can either put tissue on the back of the negative. I have one here. Here is a collodion negative. It's a collodion negative of Lincoln. What? Mark, where are your gloves? I made this negative. But as I tilt it, you can actually see some of the roughening of the varnish on the surface. But even more interesting is if you look on the back, I have glued a piece of tissue paper, tracing paper, and I have marked on the tracing paper added density. Again, for the purpose of lightening up certain areas to give a certain feeling of contrast. This is something that's reversible. If I don't like it, I can take the tissue off. So there's tissue retouching on the back side of the negative, and that's for broad areas. They're not tiny little detail areas. The detail areas are on the side that's in contact with the paper when you're printing. But we can do something more. If we take, let's see, if we take a special retouching varnish, this is really neat stuff. This is a varnish I made with a gum called mastic. There's mastic. Mastic comes from one island in Greece. You can only get it there. That's why it's so damn expensive. And if I take the mastic, in this case, I'm going to use I found this in the trash. This is a carbon print on glass. You can see it. It's a sheet of glass. And I'm going to take a cotton ball and rub some of this varnish. I'm going to rub it on the glass. Let's see, where shall I do it? I'll put some right here. Right down through the center. How about that? And this varnish has benzol in it, very strong solvent. So it's something that you probably can't get very easily, but it needs to be able to evaporate quickly. And I'm also going to take some of another varnish that I have, and the other varnish is made with sandarac and ether. So let me pour that on here. This pours much, much faster than collodion because it's pretty much all ether. And what you're going to see is that as this evaporates, it's going to leave a frosted finish. You may be able to see it already. Frosted finish on the front. I'm going to let that sit for just a second. I'm going to grab another piece of glass. I'll be right back. I realized that because I put the matte varnish over top of it, you won't be able to see what the clear varnish does. So, clear varnish. Again, this is the mastic varnish, and it dries clear. And you don't need to do it much. In fact, on dry plate negatives, what they would do is do this on the gelatin side. They would wipe it like this, just like that. Now, the first one here with the matte finish, you should be able to see that. Let me see if I turn on my phone. There we go. You can see it now. You can see it's a matte finish. In fact, it looks like a ground glass for a camera now. And it's very, very handy for retouching. So now instead of needing to have a piece of tissue paper on the back, we have a varnish that's on the back, and we can do all of our retouching right on it, right? Let's go over here. Let's go back over to this table. You guys have to let me know if the camera's in the right spot. Look good there, Nick? And so here is, again, it's a positive transparency, so you don't mind that, but you can see it has a matte finish. And actually, if we didn't like where it was, we could just take a razor blade and just remove it. I'm just going to put it right where the image was. This stuff is really fun. And if you think that you know, the creative part of making a photograph stops with the camera, then maybe the printing. Hey, this is the stuff in between. Like so, see, you can remove whatever I want. And then, of course, we can also retouch. So, just trying to see what you would be able to see. Let me just fill in this clock right here. You see, I can add density there. This bottle right here, it's too light. Just add a little bit of density there. This is too light. No, I'll do that. My happy little brush. And if I want something much stronger, you see, like so. I can show you also on the side. Here's a side where there is no image, but here's glass, right? You can't draw on glass. You can do anything you want. You can do light to dark. Let me show you also with the clear varnish. Now, here's the thing. When you're printing with printing out papers, one way of increasing density is to print with tissue paper on the outside of the printing print. It's just the way printing out process works. Let's say that you want to add density in areas, but you don't want tissue paper. You don't want a varnish that dries as a matte finish. Well, then here we go. There's the piece of glass. There's where we added the varnish. So now you have something perfectly clear that you can add different amounts of densities to. In fact, if you wanted to, you can also add graphite. You said graphite. You see, there's graphite only where that varnish was. Just like that. And so these are the tools that you needed for making people look better, to add densities to skies, essentially adding density. And you can come back to the camera one. And there was actually another level as well, and that was when you wanted to remove density, you could actually remove density on gelatin negatives. And the way to remove gelatin density negative is with an abrasive. You could use a scalpel to actually rub or scrape off areas. Can I have one of the images, please, or the next image up? I think that will turn off. Yeah, these are the scalpels that were used to remove density. Remember that the gelatin negative has the silver running throughout the whole layer of the emulsion, so you can remove a little bit at a time. You can use a knife, or you can use abrasive powders, which I have here, but I'm running out of time pretty soon. Next slide. Here's a great example. For some reason, they took this picture of the young man who had a walleye, and they decided to make him look different than what he was, make him look better. And so what they did was to actually scrape through the gelatin emulsion to establish where the eye would go, and then added densities as they needed it to correct where his eye was pointing. And it wasn't uncommon to do this sort of thing. That there was a lot of retouching done, and it continued well into the 20th century. Next slide. And sometimes, the sublime is also ridiculous. Here's one where they've removed her body completely and made her look like a bust. Next slide. This is the sequence of how it was done. So novelty. And of course, all of you have, well, you haven't, if you want to see how the landscape negatives are done, go back to the first lecture I gave on cloud combination printing. You'll see the entire thing from beginning to end. I'd like you to skip through to the Anne Brigman slides, please, if you can see that, Kate. These are landscape pictures. And again, painting out skies, tissue clouds, which are then used for printing. Those are Curtis. And I just wanted to end with these because they're so fascinating. This is a picture by Anne Brigman, California pictorialist photographer, best known for her pictures of nymph-like women with bubbles. But in this particular case, the storm is a silver gelatin print, but here's how it was made. Let's go to the next slide. Here is the original negative for that, and most people have never seen this. We have the Anne Brigman archive right here at the George Eastman Museum. And so this is an unpublished rendition of her image, which was taken with a folding Kodak camera, small gelatin negative. Next slide. And this is the sequence. On the upper left is the original negative. The original negative was scratched to reduce density. It had pigments that were added to increase density. They then took a picture of that negative on a glass plate negative to produce a glass plate inner positive, which is lower left. And on that, they added graphite to make clouds that weren't there. Remember what I just did with the clear varnish, the retouching varnish and graphite powder. So she made clouds and also added more density, and then took a picture of that on a larger glass plate, which is the third plate, And then that is the printing negative, the negative that was used for contact printing. And finally, the final print on the right-hand side. The pictorialist did a lot of retouching, and it was all about trying to remove the sense of photography and drift more towards drawing and painting, to give the impressions of things, not necessarily what they were really like. And I think it kind of worked. So if you like that kind of photography, you might get into this idea of retouching negatives, interpositives, and then the printing negative, and then finally the print, which we're also retouching. Okay, we can come back to the regular camera, number one. And I think I fit everything in. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I do. So, do you have any questions? I'll answer your question.
Great. We have lots of questions.
Uh-oh. I make this stuff up.
So one of the popular questions is just, can you tell us more about the pencil that you're using? Hard, soft, what type?
Yeah, it doesn't really, of course, I used an HB pencil, which is a standard pencil. You don't need them any softer unless you plan to blend them. Any kind of pencil work was done anywhere from a 2H, so a hard pencil, to like a 2B or HB or 2B. And sometimes they would apply pencil with hard pencils, so like an H or 2H, at very tiny little dots. The evolution of retouching becomes more sophisticated as you approach dry plate negatives. It's more primitive with the collodion negatives. But the pencils, standard pencils you can buy anywhere. Occasionally they would use something called a stump, and you can buy those as well. It's a very densely rolled up piece of paper that you use to manipulate the finish on the plate.
So there's quite a few questions about the matte varnish that you used.
Right.
So could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Don't drink it. The matte varnish is a gum sanderac. It's dissolved in ether, and there's a little bit of toluene added to it. And again, these things are designed to dry very, very quickly. If you add too much sanderac to it, it becomes just a clear varnish. But having just the right amount, and I don't really do it by formula. I add a little, I test it, I add a little. I can work up a formula if you're interested, so they're welcome to email me if they'd like. But it's a mastic, it's a sanderac varnish. We did teach 2 workshops in all of these techniques several years ago. But it takes longer to people to come to take the workshop like that because they have to know how to make negatives. And so most people interested in collodion are making ambrotypes and tintypes. It's a smaller group that makes negatives. All right.
So we have a couple questions that are about different types of faces. I think we saw a lot of white, Caucasian, European. So there were some people curious about how you would do retouching techniques on darker skinned subjects.
That's a really great question. And the funny thing is, I had a slide that I meant to get into the set that I chose, and somehow they got lost. It was a picture taken in India of a wealthy couple and studio photograph, and it had blue dye over all the faces. If this person is very interested, if they contact me, when I find it, I can send them a file of it. You have to remember that in most cases, again, remember, Caucasian faces photograph dark. Darker skinned people photograph black. In fact, they can photograph as if they're polished ebony. There's not much retouching you can do on that. The other approach is to actually take pictures of people with dark skin against the dark background. If you take dark-skinned people against the dark background, it will automatically make their face lighter. Now, the problem with that is, and it's really interesting, we had a workshop here where we were doing, what were we doing? It was either collodion negatives, and we had someone taking the class from India, and she had beautiful dark skin. And the rendition we got with the negative was dead on, which is hard to do. Again, it can look like polished ebony. It had roundness. It was beautiful. She was in tears. In her culture, having lighter skin is much more important than having beautiful dark skin. So there's that part, right? So you can photograph people with darker skin so that they appear a little bit lighter, and then you can add retouching. But for the most part, there weren't too many people doing pictures of Black people or Mexican people, except in Mexico, or other people with darker skin in the United States. Of course, if you went to Greece, you would see that. If you went to China, you would see skin that's photographing darker. And you really have to look at the pictures from those cultures to see what they didn't do. And, they're not always that flattering. Next question.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions that are curious about kind of going too far with these techniques. So, when you're using the cuttlefish, how hard are you pressing? How careful do you need to be when applying all these?
Right. I mean, that's skill, right? You're not born with these things. You have to learn how to do them. I taught myself all this stuff, and you ruin things until you get good at it. The cuttlefish bone is pretty forgiving. And so you can rub and rub and rub. And in fact, if you don't like the pencil you put on, you can take some cuttlefish bone and remove the pencil that you did. You just have to just do it. Get a plate you don't care about and just try it. The main thing is with the cuttlefish bone is to make sure that you do filter it. And again, you get a fine bag. It has a porous cloth, and you put the cuttlefish bone powder, and then you just go like this and let it fall through the openings in the cloth. It's the easiest way.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time for today. This has been another fascinating demonstration. If anyone has questions that they want to follow up on, if you're interested in learning more, you can do online tutorials with Mark and Nick, and they can walk you through some of these techniques, and they can kind of show you more up close and personal what these recipes are. So feel free to reach out to them at workshops@eastman.org. And we always love to hear your feedback too. If you missed out on any talks in the past, all of those are available on YouTube. You can access them at eastman.org/videos. And thank you so much today, Mark, for doing this last one of the year. And thank you all so much for coming. We hope to see you next year.